Hey everyone, today we are speaking with Lori Richardson on the Shake Sales podcast. Welcome back. Thanks for being here. Lori is a podcast host of Conversations with Women in Sales, and she's a revenue strategist at Score More Sales and the author of her new book, She Sells, which we'll be diving into a little bit more today and just talking about all around the subject of women in sales. So Lori, thank you so much for being here. Do you mind taking some time to introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Maggie. You did a good job. And I spent about 16 years in business to business selling myself and started in my early 20s as a single mom. And I really love sales. It's a game changer that equals what, anyone can do in business. It's just such an equalizer and it is such an opportunity for people that I love championing it. And in about 2015, I started seeing that there were still not very many women in sales after my whole career. And so I wanted to help get more women into sales. So I started Women Sales Pros, and we have an event called the She Sells Summit that's going to be April 6th. And we do about an annual event where we invite all the different women in sales groups. So that's kind of a cool thing that I'm working on right now.
Awesome. And that's April 6th, you said?
Yes.
Amazing. And so this She Sells Summit, and then that's also the title of your new book, right? Which you have with you right now?
Yeah. She Sells, Attract, Promote, Retain Great Women in B2B Sales.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I'm excited to dive into it. Thanks so much for taking time to introduce yourself. So like you said, your book is about attracting, promoting, retaining great women in B2B sales. And that's kind of a gap you saw, like you said, back in 2015. And, to start this out, I read this quote from your Amazon page of, people that have bought and read the book already. And this quote came specifically, I think, from a male. And what he wrote was, "As well-intended as I was, I found I was unconsciously doing things that either were not helpful or, in the worst case, disadvantaged women. And none of that was my intent." So I found that pretty powerful, especially the end part of it. Like, it wasn't his intent to, do those things, and then realize it from your book. So I guess, my question for you, what do you think is the biggest gap keeping companies from attracting and retaining more women in B2B sales?
Yeah, that's such a great place to start, because I really wrote the book for mostly men, people who are in leadership roles in companies who are mostly men, especially in sales. But they're for anyone that's having trouble finding and hiring and retaining women, because some people at companies really want to. And I get those calls every week from leaders who say, "Do you know of any women leaders who, could apply for this role?" And I didn't write it for the people who we have to convince because they won't hire. For example, there was a company where a head of sales reached out to me, and he said that his CEO won't allow female hires in field sales because, they're probably going to leave and have kids. And I just was like, oh my goodness, this is not for them, because I'm not here to convince anyone of something. If they get it, but they're just having trouble, these are tips throughout the book, and they're tactical and a little bit strategic on the mindset. So I think the biggest thing is that from the top, the company has to be committed to this, and they have to understand that it's different than they might think, in that they may need to work to convince a woman to take a role differently than a man, for example. We know that women have, we weigh things over time. We want to know about our professional development opportunities. We want to know about the ethics and the standards of the company, what they believe in. And then we make a decision. Men tend, and I don't want to overgeneralize, but generally men are more about, what does it pay? What are my growth? What title can I have? women don't care as much about the title typically, but we want opportunity to grow, and we want to be able to learn and make an impact. We want to be heard, and we want to be paid fairly. So if a company can cover all those things, it makes it a lot easier to get someone's attention and then to retain them.
Got it. So it sounds like, and obviously, like you said, your book goes into more tips about it, but the general overall picture is just more thinking intentionally about it. And I think going back to that quote from that guy of the review that he left of, it's just like, maybe it wasn't their intention to write a, job position or job description a certain way, but, that could keep women from applying to a specific job or wanting to work somewhere or seeing someone's LinkedIn page. And maybe most of the team is male, which would intimidate myself when applying for a job there. So it sounds like it's just being more intentional about thinking back, taking a step back of what would women want out of this role. Yeah,
absolutely. And I have a good friend named Shep Maher, who's a sales leader in the Bay Area. And he speaks on panels sometimes. He's one of those really good guys who is, happy to speak up about opportunities for people that are less likely to be hired in the workplace. And he spoke on a panel once. We were at Dreamforce, actually. And afterwards, he had some of his team in the audience, and there were some women team members there. And he told me that instead of, you would just think like, oh, what a great job I did. But he went to the women and said, did I represent what we're doing fairly? I mean, like, what did I miss? And so even though he's one of the people who's a strong ally, he's still checking to say, what could I do differently? Or, how could we be even better? And that's what a good leader does. It's part of being a servant leader, in all ways, but to really think about those that are less advantaged, to helping you build a more well-rounded team and an inclusive team. We really need that in sales.
Yeah, that's amazing that he did that. And like you said, really a great example of servant leadership and, just kind of like taking the crowd audience, and the team's opinion about it too, and making sure that, I guess as people like to say now, like checking themselves with their team after it and making sure that they're in tune with what they want to represent.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So yeah, we talked about, attracting and retaining women in B2B sales. So let's say leadership is past the attracting, hiring women in sales. What ultimately drives women to leave certain sales organizations? Because I know this is something that you bring up in your book is, retaining great women in B2B sales. So yeah, what are some of those reasons that ultimately drive them to leave?
Yeah, the biggest things I heard when I did research, and I've been asking women, and we've been interviewing people for the last, I would say since 2015. So that's about 7, 8 years, is people feel like their voice is not being heard. They're clearly passed over for promotion with a less capable or less ready male. It happens quite often. Or they find out that they're paid differently, paid less. It's still in 2023. It just amazes me that happens. And or they just feel like they don't have a future there. They're not being heard. They're not part of the group, the team. And so they go to another company. And this is where, for all the efforts to recruit someone and to help onboard them and give them a good experience, you don't want to lose them because it's just status quo or it gets stagnant. So you need to keep talking, just like we were talking about a minute ago, is getting feedback and seeing how can we be even better and making promotions that really matter, not just in title, but in pay as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Progressing there and making sure that they're, being treated fairly. Like you said, it's still shocking that there's pay differences and we're in 2023, which people have been talking about for a while, especially with women, specifically women in sales too.
And women of color.
Reasons of,
yeah,
exactly. And you gave those reasons of saying, it's obviously, if any of us, the two of us talking right now, that would be a reason for us to leave too. If we're figuring out we're getting paid less or getting skipped over for obvious promotions and things like that. And how do you feel like those reasons differ from men leaving companies?
I think a lot of times men are practical. They have a bigger opportunity. There's a lot of people out there recruiting, and it seems to me to be more of, I can get this title. I can get closer to my goal of CEO or VP sales or what have you. I just think it's more practical, and men don't have to maneuver a lot of the landmines that women do. So it's just kind of a simple progression for a lot of guys, not all, but a lot of them.
Got it. So it's a bit more, those moves are a bit more practical. So more is having to do with, like a pay raise or, the next opportunity at a different company and things like that. Okay.
Yeah. Or they get a new boss that they clash with, what have you.
Gotcha. What leaves them to leave there. Okay. Yeah. And, it's interesting, those points that you bring up too, especially as far as you've put in all this effort of attracting women, going through the hiring process, having someone on board, and then making sure, and retaining those employees that you have across the board, but especially women, like you said, and just making sure that, you're digging in and seeing, hey, what's going to keep them here? What am I doing? Where's the feedback coming from? So would you say that's a big part of it, is really just receiving that feedback to make sure, leadership can stay on path with, keeping their team?
Yeah, an inclusive sales team is an advantage to a company. So it should have metrics and discussion, just like any other thing, any other aspect of a sales team or go-to-market motion that a company has. So in just like anything else, we need to regularly talk about how are we doing. Are we looking for more diverse candidates? What's happening? And really discussing things. The more we can comfortably discuss, the better we're going to be.
Got it. Yeah. So just having those vulnerable conversations. And I like that you compare it. I was just talking with someone the other day about, there's a lot of relations between, I used to be a recruiter. I'm also in sales now. And there's a lot of relations between sales and hiring processes, but also I didn't even think about it from that sense of like the retaining process. And it's the same way we could think about customers almost of, are we receiving feedback? Are we listening to them, whether it be calls or hearing testimonials or just reviews that they leave us? And are we taking that all into consideration when we sell and when we have customer success and retain customers there too? That's awesome.
And not just down the road, but in 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, just like a new customer, we would want to know, how are things going? Are you really trying things out? Because we know that renewals in SaaS, it starts early on. You don't go 11 months in and then say, hey, you're going to renew in a month. How's everything going? And it's the same with people.
Yeah. Which, we've all seen with some SaaS companies before. But you're right. It's the same with people. And also that part of like setting up goals. So just like, we talk about all the time in SaaS B2B, like, hey, let's set up goals for these clients, make sure we're hitting them. That's the goal of CS, is they want to make sure that they're on track for why they signed up for this tool to begin with. And I think the same thing happens with hiring as well, and keeping and retaining talent is, here are the goals that they talk to us about in our beginning interview. Let's see if they're on the path to do that, because that's ultimately what's going to make them stay.
Yeah, totally.
Awesome. So and just recently, I know we touched about this in the beginning, and we talked, about these different ideas and themes from your book. But I read this stat recently that said women make up less than 25% of B2B tech sales roles. but profits are 50% higher when women are well represented. So yeah, I found it interesting.
Yeah, I'd like to see that stat. I'm not sure of that one. But definitely 25% of women in like entry level sales, early sales roles is possible. We've lost a lot of women, so I don't even know. No one's done anything post pandemic. So I'm looking forward. I talked to LinkedIn about doing something, and they're, thinking about it among all the other things that they do. It would be really great to get some updated stats. The sad thing is that the higher you go in sales, the less women. And so last I saw, and this was pre-pandemic, was that women only represented between 11 and 15% of VP sales and above. And it depends whose survey you look at, but that was pre-pandemic. And I'm here to say that it could be lower now. And so we know that women make great leaders, and we know that women can be great in sales. We know that sales isn't for everyone. So just because someone's female doesn't mean they're going to be good in sales. And we know some great men in sales too. For me, what I've learned over time is that there are 21 core sales competencies that strong salespeople have. And so I work towards that rather than whether someone's male or female. But I say, if women are just as good, generally speaking, why aren't there, half of the sales team? Why isn't half the sales team female? It's just part of the old boys network, that started years ago, that men built sales, men built business, and we've been let in, slowly over time. So, but there's still a lot of structural issues that we need to work on
before we can, start attracting more women in sales too. And you brought up a good point too. It's, it's that like lack of diversity almost in sales, across the board. And, I've heard you talk on other podcasts too, of like how, the diversity in sales, obviously in any role or any company, is really important, but especially for sellers when they're at the front lines of companies and talking with people and relating to people too. I've heard you talk about that. That's a really important factor to have on your sales team, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, I mean, thank you so much for talking with me today and, going through a couple questions here around your book and, just to kind of finish off here, where can people find your book? Where can they learn more about what you're doing? Right there. But where's the best place to find you?
On Amazon. There is a Kindle version. There's this easy to read paperback version. People say they can do it in 2 sittings, maybe even 1. I challenge people. But the biggest thing is, if you know a sales team, or if you're part of a larger company that has a lot of sales managers that could benefit, I'd love for people to share that and, to give it to a leader to possibly have for their teams, because it was really meant to help people solve issues. So if there's somebody struggling, we want to make sure that we get this in front of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And from what you said earlier too, it's for people who already know that they're, struggling with hiring, attracting, promoting, retaining great women, to really give them the tools to do that and give them the confidence to find the right women and bring them into sales as well. But awesome. Lori, thank you so much for talking with me today. Last thing I always like to ask people before we talk about their, when we end talking about their book is, besides your book, what's another book out there that you'd recommend for someone in sales?
There's a great new book by an author named Helen Fanucci, who works at Microsoft. And it's called, I actually have one right here. It's called Love Your Team. I read a lot of books. Love Your Team, a survival guide for sales managers in a hybrid world. And it's excellent. It has actual words of, here's what you can say when you run into this situation. It's been really helpful for a lot of sales managers.
Awesome.
So shout out to Helen.
Yeah, awesome. Supporting other people, supporting other authors out there. Lori, thank you so much for talking with me today. And thank you everyone for listening to another episode of Shake Sales. We'll catch you next time.